They called him the finest sword in the world, a knight without fear, a man whose honor was purer than steel. Ned Stark, a man who fought against the Targaryens, said Arthur Dayne was the greatest fighter he had ever faced. Barristan Selmy, a living legend, said Arthur was the finest knight he had ever seen. Jaime Lannister dreamed of becoming like him. But on the last day of his life, Arthur Dayne did not fight for glory, not for the king, not for the crown. He fought for a promise made to a friend who was already dead. House Dayne. The castle of Starfall, in the southwest of Dorne, at the mouth of the Torrentine. An ancient house, one of the oldest in Westeros. The Daynes had a sword, not Valyrian steel, something else. Dawn, forged from the metal of a fallen star, a pale white blade, light as the morning sky. They said it glowed in the dark. But Dawn could not simply be inherited. Not every Dayne had the right to carry it. Only the one, deemed worthy, received the sword and the title, the Sword of the Morning. Sometimes generations passed without a worthy bearer. Dawn would lie and wait. Arthur, the second son of Lord Dayne, trained with the sword from childhood. In Starfall, under the burning Dornish sun, every day, every year. He did not just train, he lived it. While other boys ran and played, Arthur stood in the yard with a practice sword and repeated his strikes, again and again. And one day, he was deemed worthy. Dawn came to rest in his hands, a blade from a star, for a man who earned the right to bear its name. Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. He wore it across his back, always, walking the corridors of the Red Keep, riding through forest trails, the white hilt rising above his shoulder. People saw that sword, and they knew. Before them stood the one man you did not want to fight. Before he became a legend, Arthur became a knight. The Kingswood Brotherhood, a band of outlaws hiding in the forests near King's Landing. They robbed lords, kidnapped nobles, vanished before anyone could find them. The Mad King sent the Kingsguard to deal with them. Arthur led the mission. And he did what no one had done before. He did not just cut down bandits. He went to the local peasants, the people who lived in those woods, and paid them. For the food soldiers had taken, for firewood, for grain. He brought their grievances directly to the king. The common people began to help. Because Arthur treated them like people, not like dirt beneath his boots. The Brotherhood was destroyed. Their leader, the Smiling Knight, a madman feared by everyone, challenged Arthur to single combat. Mid-fight, the Smiling Knight's sword broke. Arthur stopped. Let him take another, because killing an unarmed man was beneath his honor. When the man raised a new blade, Arthur ended the fight with a single stroke. After that battle, a young squire named Jaime Lannister was knighted by the hand of Arthur Dayne. The boy who was made a knight by the greatest swordsman in the world remembered it for the rest of his life, and spent that life trying to be worthy of it. Arthur Dayne was a knight of the Kingsguard. He guarded the king, but his loyalty was not to the king, It was to the prince, Rhaegar Targaryen. They were not simply prince and guard. They were friends, the closest kind. The kind where one does not need to explain, the other already understands. They fought each other in tournaments. Arthur defeated Rhaegar at Lannisport. Rhaegar took his revenge at Storm's End. They trained together, the two finest fighters in the kingdom, each making the other stronger. But their bond went deeper than swords. Rhaegar played the harp, and Arthur was there, not because he had to be, because he listened. Rhaegar sat in the ruins of Summerhall, where his ancestors died trying to bring back dragons, and played sad melodies, and Arthur stood nearby and kept watch, not from enemies, from a world that did not understand his friend. The great tourney at Harrenhal. Arthur was there. He saw everything. Saw Rhaegar defeat Barristan Selmy. Saw him take the crown of winter roses. Saw him ride past Elia. And saw him place the roses on Lyanna Stark's lap. Arthur stood in his white cloak and watched. He knew Rhaegar better than anyone. He saw his eyes and understood this was not a whim, not madness. This was something else.
I've noticed something has been troubling you lately.
I've wanted to tell you for a long time, but I did not know if you would understand.
Later, Rhaegar told him about the dream, about a boy with dark hair and fire in his eyes, about the song of ice and fire, about a child who must unite the blood of the dragon and the wolf and stand between the world and the darkness. Anyone else would have thought the prince had lost his mind. Arthur believed him because he knew Rhaegar, knew he did not waste words, did not chase phantoms. If Rhaegar said he saw it, he saw it. If he said the world was in danger, it was in danger. Arthur was the witness. Beneath a heart tree, far from all eyes, Rhaegar and Lyanna were married. A secret ceremony, just the two of them, and Arthur beside them. He saw their faces, saw how Rhaegar, the forever melancholy prince, the man who had carried the weight of prophecy his entire life, smiled, truly, for the first time. And Lyanna, the wolf girl of the north, fierce, strong, fearless, looked at him as though she had found what she had been searching for all her life.
I thought I would never find you.
I'm very happy that you found me.
Arthur stood to the side, in his white cloak, dawn across his back, and he saw this was not a scheme, not a kidnapping, not madness. This was love. He guarded them at the Tower of Joy, saw them together every day. Rhaegar played the harp for Lyanna, and she laughed. They walked together, and Arthur followed behind, at a distance, not intruding, guarding. For the first time, he saw Rhaegar happy, and that was worth everything. Rhaegar Targaryen had left the Tower of Joy again. Together with Gerold Hightower and Oswell Whent, they had gone to King's Landing. Arthur knew why. Sometimes Rhaegar secretly returned there to see Rhaenys and little Aegon. On one such evening, Arthur Dayne sat by the fire in the tower courtyard. The night was quiet. Only the wind moving through the stones and the crackle of logs in the flame. He heard footsteps. Lyanna Stark walked up to the fire. Arthur rose immediately. "My lady." She smiled slightly. "Forgive me, am I intruding? I do not want to sit alone." Dayne shook his head gently. "I have no right to forbid you, my lady." Lyanna sat by the fire. For a few seconds they were silent, listening to the crackling wood. "I have heard much about you, Ser Arthur," she said at last. "Your skill is the stuff of legends." Dayne smirked, just the corner of his mouth. "People love to exaggerate, but I know men stronger than me." Lyanna looked at him, surprised. "And who would that be?" "Sir Barristan Selmy, and Prince Rhaegar." She smiled quietly. "I think you are too modest, Sir Arthur. I am certain your name stands alongside theirs." Dayne said nothing, only turned his gaze to the fire. After a pause, Lyanna asked, "The prince trusts you very much, does he not?" A warm smile appeared on Arthur's face. "Yes, my lady." Lyanna looked into the flames. "He misses his children very much, does he not?" Dayne's smile softened. "Especially Rhaenys. She is her father's favorite. She would always climb onto his shoulders and refuse to come down." He chuckled quietly. "And Aegon cried a great deal, but the moment the prince took him in his arms, he would calm down instantly." Lyanna lowered her eyes. For a time, they were silent. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes it feels as though all of this is a dream. I no longer understand what is happening to the world. Because of us, everything is falling apart." Arthur stared at the fire for a long time before answering. "Perhaps everything is happening as it must, my lady. And the boy who will be born here will change the world. I truly believe that." Lyanna was silent for several seconds. Then she smiled quietly. "When I was a child, I listened to stories about a savior, about a prince who was promised to the world." She lowered her gaze. "And I always wondered what she was like, the woman destined to give birth to him." Silence. Only the wind and the crackle of the fire. "How was I to know that one day it would be me?" Arthur looked at her, and for the first time that evening, smiled with genuine warmth. Lyanna smiled in return. One of the last peaceful evenings at the Tower of Joy. The day came when Rhaegar had to leave. Not for a time, for war. Rhaegar was leaving. The Mad King had summoned him back. The war demanded its prince. Arthur stood before him. They looked at each other. Two lives, woven together through battles, tournaments, quiet evenings in the ruins of Summerhall. Rhaegar said, "I know you would want to ride with me, my friend. But I need you here. You are my shield, my brother, the one I trust above all others." Rhaegar said, "If I do not return, protect him, protect her, whatever happens." Arthur, the greatest swordsman alive, could have ridden with Rhaegar to the Trident. Many would say later, if Arthur had been there, Rhaegar would not have died. Perhaps. Arthur was stronger than Robert, but Rhaegar asked him to stay, and Arthur stayed. He knelt, placed his hand on the hilt of dawn, and gave his word. Arthur was not alone. With him were two others, Sir Oswell Whent and Sir Gerold Hightower. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, the White Bull, they called him, for his enormous strength. They did not believe in prophecies the way Arthur did. For Hightower, the world was simple. There is an oath, there is a post, you stand or you fall. Prophecies are for maesters and bookmen, not for knights. Whent was practical. He saw the world burning, saw that they were called traitors, that 3 of the finest swords in the realm stood in the Dornish mountains instead of fighting at the Trident. One evening by the fire, Whent said, "The world is burning, Gerold. They will call us traitors." Arthur answered, "Let them. We are not protecting a crown. We are protecting the life he entrusted to us." Hightower was silent for a long time, then said, "I have lived long enough to know, honor is not what people say about you. It is what you do when no one is watching. I am with you, Arthur." 3 nights, by a fire in the mountains of Dorne. They knew they would most likely die here. They knew no one would remember their sacrifice, that history would be written by the victors, and in that history, they would be the villains. But they stayed, because Arthur stayed, and that was enough. The news came. Rhaegar was dead, killed at the Trident. Robert's hammer caved in his chest, rubies scattered. Arthur stood below, motionless, his face stone. His closest friend, the man for whom he stood here, the man to whom he gave his word, dead. Suddenly, a scream from above. Arthur ran upstairs, alarmed, fast. Lyanna had learned of her beloved's death. Arthur reached her and saw. Lyanna was on the floor, on her knees, arms pressed to her stomach. She wept so hard she could not breathe. Arthur, knight, warrior, a man who had held his composure his entire life, broke. He sat beside her. Held her, not as a guard holds a lady, as one person holds another who is in pain. Lyanna sobbed. "Why did you leave us?" she repeated, again and again. Lyanna wept. Arthur held her in silence. Outside the walls, the world was collapsing. But in that room, two people shared one grief. Rhaegar had not even had time to name his child, and Lyanna mourned not only the man she loved, she mourned Rhaegar's children too. Little Rhaenys, the other Aegon, the boy Rhaegar had loved so dearly. Lyanna asked Arthur, "If anything happens to me, his name is Aegon, Aegon Targaryen." She named her son after his fallen brother, after the child Rhaegar had loved so much. News kept arriving, one after another. The Mad King, dead, killed by Jaime Lannister. King's Landing had fallen. Rhaegar's children, Aegon and Rhaenys, dead, killed by Tywin Lannister's men, not by Robert's direct order, but with his silent approval, Arthur thought. He had seen those children, little Rhaenys, who chased a cat through the corridors of the Red Keep, the infant Aegon, whom Rhaegar held in his arms and called the Promised One. If they did this to Rhaegar's children in the capital, what would they do to the child here? And now, Eddard Stark was riding toward the Tower of Joy, Lyanna's brother, but also Robert's right hand, a man who had fought alongside the usurper. Arthur understood. Ned did not know the truth. Ned believed Lyanna was kidnapped, that she was a prisoner, that Arthur was an accomplice to rape. Ned was coming to save his sister, with anger, with grief, with fury. Words would not help. Arthur knew this. If he said, Rhaegar and Lyanna loved each other, Ned would take it as the vilest lie imaginable. And if Arthur stepped aside, if he gave up the child, what then? Ned would bring him to Robert? Robert would see Rhaegar's son, and do what? Arthur could not take that risk, could not know that Ned would prove noble enough to protect the child, could not know that Ned would name him his own bastard and carry that lie until the end. He knew one thing. Rhaegar asked him to protect his son, at any cost. Dust on the horizon. 7 riders. Ned Stark, in front. 3 knights of the Kingsguard stood before the Tower of Joy, in white cloaks, armed. Arthur, with dawn across his back. Ned stopped his horse, looked at them. In his eyes, fury, pain, loss. "Why were you not there, to protect your prince?" said Ned. Arthur answered, "Our prince commanded us to a more important duty." Ned flared. "Duty? You call this duty, while her family was being slaughtered?" Arthur was silent. He could have told them everything, about the love, the marriage, the child, but he saw Ned's eyes and knew. Right now, words were useless. The anger was too great. Hightower said, "The Kingsguard does not flee." Arthur fought not with hatred, with desperation. He knew Ned was a good man, knew that before him stood Lyanna's brother. But good men in this war had already handed children over to die. Arthur could not take the risk. A promise is heavier than life. The fight was short and terrible, 7 against 3. Whent fell. Hightower fell. Arthur fought alone, against all of them. Howland Reed, a small crannogman from the neck, the very man Lyanna had once defended, struck from behind, saved Ned. Arthur Dayne fell, dawn in blood, the white cloak in the dust. The last sword of the morning went dark. Ned climbed the tower and found what he did not expect. Not a prisoner, his sister, dying, a baby in her arms, and a truth that changed everything. Arthur Dayne never learned this, never learned that Ned turned out to be the man who could be trusted with the child. Never learned that Ned named the boy John and protected him for a lifetime. Never learned that the promise he made to Rhaegar was kept, not by his hands, but kept. After the battle, Ned took Dawn, rode to Starfall, to the Dayne castle, and returned the sword to Arthur's sister, Ashara. Ned Stark, the man who killed Arthur Dayne, brought his sword home, because even an enemy deserves honor. Ashara, a loving sister, her beloved brother, honest, kind, strong, who had carried her on his shoulders, who loved her more than anyone, and she loved him more than anyone, was gone. She could not bear it, could not live in a world without her brother. They say that after Arthur's death, Ashara could not endure the loss, and one day she threw herself into the sea from the cliffs of Starfall. Ser Arthur Dayne, the sword of the morning, the finest knight of his generation. The world remembered him as the guard of a kidnapper, a man who watched over a prisoner while the world burned. But the truth was different. He guarded love. He guarded a promise. He guarded a child who years later would stand before the darkness. Three nights at the tower, 3 white cloaks, 3 lives, given for a boy the world did not yet know. They held the oath they made to their prince and did not retreat, even when it cost them their lives.